Oh, hey! I'm glad you're here. Normally, VHS is a podcast where each episode is about a film and the guest has the profession or experience portrayed in the film, but sometimes I like to do whatever I want. And what I want to do right now is talk about one of my favorite directors with one of my favorite people to podcast with. But before we get to that episode, I wanted to share a conversation I was having with my wife and co host, Sarah. So, we were talking about a friend who's a chef, Jose. He's from Spain, and in his restaurants, he would have imported ingredients from Spain, and one restaurant had tile or marble from Spain, and it would be easy to think that the tile or the imported ham is what made the restaurant special, but it wasn't. What made the restaurants and his food special is Jose. It's who he is, and it's what he does with those components and the community that he's created working within the restaurants. A chef is not unlike a director in that way. And this episode is dedicated to one of my favorite directors and to any and all who had the chance to know and to work with them. So let's get right to it. The films are the works of Dirk Jarman, the guest is Carmelita Valdez McKoy, and this is VHS. Hello and welcome to VHS. I'm your host Dirk Marshall. My guest for this special episode is Carmelita Valdez McKoy. Welcome back.
Hi, friend. Thank you so much for having me back.
Well, you're sort of the reason this episode will even exist. For this special episode, we will be discussing some of the films of one of my favorite directors, Dirk Jarman. So let's just start there. Carmelita, what is your history with Dirk Jarman?
Well, Dirk Jarman is one of my favorites too. And I was aware of him going back to, I think my introduction to him was his work in music videos.
Excellent.
And then I saw Jubilee. And then over time, I was interested in learning more, but I didn't always have access. Like I would have had to really go hard to try and track down his other work.
Do you remember what music videos were? Which ones first caught your eye?
Oh, God. The work he did for the Smiths.
Yes. Yeah. He did a couple of their videos. And then if you buy the video collection out on DVD and I'm sure Blu-ray, that he has the 3-song sort of suite with The Queen is Dead and it ends with Panic. I just watched it the other day. It's so good.
Yeah. It's really saying something because the Smiths notorious for not being interested in having music videos, doing music videos. So the only music videos that were done, that's him. So I think that says a lot about his artistic integrity. Mm-hmm. Just, the faith that they would put into him to be the one to put the music to visuals. And it's been really cool in recent years as I've been able to get access to more of his films and learn more about him. I just love him that much more. The more I learn, the more I see, the more I experience, the more I love him. So,
yeah, same. In the late 90s, I started, as I found more books, I was going to Hungry Head Books was the bookstore where I lived that had the occult stuff and all the cool stuff. Very small bookstore. I still have my book here bookmarked with the Hungry Head bookmark.
Nice.
And so when I worked at an independent record store, I found I had access to special ordering things that weren't just the CDs. So I was able to get the Pet Shop Boys Projections VHS, which is all of Dirk Jarman's visuals he did for a tour, which played behind the Pet Shop Boys. So that's one of my prized Dirk Jarman possessions because I found him because I was a teenager who was very into Coil, and Coil was an experimental English music group formed in '82 in London by John Balance and Peter Christopherson. The first live Coil performance was during a screening of a Dirk Jarman film in 1985. And they did the soundtrack for Jarman's film, The Angelic Conversation. So I kept seeing this filmmaker's name, and I had to know why. And since seeing my first Jarman, I just was hooked. My appreciation for his work coincided with the decline in his health, unfortunately, which seemed very unfair for me. But so I just began, and my need to read just grew. I bought my first of his memoirs, Modern Nature, and after that, I needed all of them. So it's with my utmost pleasure that we'll just begin this episode. Brief little Dirk Jarman here. Dirk Jarman came to film through painting and art. It's been said that he used art to sort of retreat into rather than confront. It's a sentiment that I think really rings true through the sexuality in his work. And as he evolved from paint to doing the set decorations for Ken Russell for movies like The Devil and on through his other films, that's not to say that there isn't anger in his work and emotions for sure in his films, but like I think of it like a painter painting angry ends up with an angry painting. One of the times that I really think of is one time Sarah was home and she was painting, and I had a 6 disc CD changer. This is the early 2000s, and in it was an early Combi Christ album, which was just very aggressive techno. And so I came home and she's like, I don't know what happened, but this painting is like nuts. And I was like, oh, sorry about that. You got Combi Christ. And, I think that that's what I think of here in some of his work. I think the sexuality is very sensual and it's not used in a sort of brutalism kind of way. Derek is easily one of the most innovative filmmakers in Britain from the 70s, 80s, and early 90s, and we'll get to more of that as we discuss these 5 films. I won't be going through his entire life. I'm not NPR. If you'd like to know more about Derek Jarman, and you should, I highly recommend the 2008 documentary Derek, which was made by Tilda Swinton, who knew and worked very closely with Derek Jarman.
His life was what he was interested in, and that's the way he made films, by the way. That's probably the simplest way to describe what it was to make a film with him. It was all about process. I worked alongside him for, I think, 8 years, and it was as if we started a conversation and it went on for 8 years. It's been interrupted. He's been otherwise engaged for a while, but it was a continuum. And then every year we would think of a way of expressing the conversation we were all having. And then we'd say, well, why don't we make it with the second? And then the next year it would be, well, it's a war requiem, and or whatever the order is, But it would all come out of the same conversation. And that was the great luxury. It was all about process. And to be honest with you, we never worried about the life of the films as they came out because we were so confident that the audience was there. And we were so not interested in the short-term view. And we knew that over 10 years, these films, audience would accrue. And it was a great luxury and to be recommended to any artist because it meant that we were safe in our company and in our conversation.
And also just the wealth of memoirs and journals that he published. Like you can hear about his life and his thoughts and feelings straight from the horse's mouth, even though he's gone.
Yeah, and I was just obsessed with that growing up, and I continue to be so. The memoirs are printed, but you can also get Derek Jarman's sketchbook, where it's actually his own handwriting and his own collages, and it is, very special. It's just beautiful. I highly recommend it. But why Derek, for me, is a question that I come to a lot of times. I was a kid who had not seen the likes of Derek Jarman. I lived in a small town in Oregon in the 90s. This is pre-internet, so you couldn't really feel more cut off from anyone, really. I only knew one person who I was pretty sure was gay, but this was a logging town, so people weren't out per se. I wasn't gay, but I was called all the slurs at school, so I figured we're on the same team. What I learned from Derek Jarman was about life for an artist. The hurt of being gay and not being allowed to be yourself. I learned about AIDS from the perspective of a person living with it. I remember reading a passage in At Your Own Risk, which I'll share now. At a London art school in 1964. On one evening in March, I went around early and Michael wasn't there. A young Canadian was sitting at a piano. He was a student of psychology at Alberta University. We were the same age, 22. I missed the last bus and Brenda said to me, why don't you stay in Michael's bed tonight? It's very late and he's not coming home. As I was falling asleep, Ron crossed the room and got into bed with me. It was so unexpected. I didn't acquaint queer people with youth. I thought they were middle-aged, as the papers said. When Ron got into bed, I was so startled I just lay in his arms. Next morning, when I awoke, he'd gone. Were we going to see him this evening? Yes, Brenda said. He's coming back, I thought. Shall I ring him? Better not. I'll wait. It's these little inclusions of, this awakening of a person that we're privy to through these journals. And we've all been in those situations where it's like, oh my gosh, does this person like me? I don't know what this means. And so you're just there in the moment. And he includes these things in his films, these embraces that I don't think we really were getting anywhere else. And this frustration of finding love and not being able to shout it from the rooftops. It's just stuff that I'd never thought about. I knew lonely, I knew feeling isolated, but I didn't know that if I found someone and society was saying no, that didn't,
Mm.
it's just, it really just it opened my eyes to a lot of things that I'm so thankful for. I also learned about poems, and I learned about gardens. His use of words made a 15-year-old kid into angry industrial music be interested in plants. If you look through pictures of Derek, you'll see his joyous smile, this light behind his eyes. He's just somebody that means so much to me, and I struggle to adequately articulate it, and that itself brings me back to his words, his paintings, and his movies. His work can be called many things, but I think it's best if we just hear it from Derek.
I never thought of myself as a film director. I have to say that at any point in my life. Canvas was much more private, of course, and it was great to paint, but every now and again it was more fun to have a lot of people around, and so the element of what one might call throwing a party in my filmmaking was very important. And everyone used to come along, and I would try and give them a good day, It's happy work. That was my aim. It's probably all I actually ever wanted out of the whole thing.
I think that's perfectly worded. For our conversation, we're beginning with Jubilee from 1977, Jarman's second feature film, the first being Sebastian. Jubilee stars Jenny Runeker, Ian Charleson, and a host of punk rockers. The title refers to the Silver Jubilee of Elizabeth II in 1977. Numerous punk icons appear in this film, including Adam Ant, Toya, Jordan, Nell Campbell, Hermione Demoraine, and Jane County. It features live performances by Jane County and Adam and the Ants. There's also cameo appearances by the Slits and Susie and the Banshees, and the film score is by Brian Eno. Carmelita, what are your thoughts on Jubilee?
This film, this was one of those artifacts of culture that was like, if you want to better understand, at least this was my idea going into it when I first saw it, if you want to better understand 77, the genesis of punk culture and music, this was something important to check out.
Yeah.
And I do think that it's more generally about youth subculture. Mm-hmm. In this case, specifically punk, and you have all of these people who were there on the King's Road at Vivienne Westwood, Malcolm McLaren's Sex Boutique, the bands that were emerging, the people that were in that scene. And then you also have, I think, something that Derek Jarman's work does so beautifully, and you see it right here from the get-go with Jubilee, is kind of this state of the nation, what was going on socially, politically, what the pulse of the place where he is coming from, which was England. And I think this film is interesting because it does have a narrative, but there's a lot of breaks for just the characters in a room having conversations, kind of slice of life moments that sometimes when I watch this, I think I forget that there's this narrative that's running throughout.
Yeah.
Because I get so into the moments where we're just hearing these characters talk about their life, their experience, their philosophy and ethos, where you're just seeing them interact and have these really just interesting conversations. And then, Queen Elizabeth, the first, will come back. And I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot. There's this story that we're moving through. That I think some of my favorite parts are the non-narrative pieces.
Oh, yeah.
Which is kind of cool because later in Jarman's career, he will make primarily non-narrative films. So this one is kind of a little bit of both, I think.
Yeah. No, I agree. I love Jubilee. It's not my favorite Derek Jarman movie, but it's also not my first. For people that don't know, the synopsis is: an angel brings Queen Elizabeth I to contemporary London, where she finds sympathy for a band of violent female rebels. There you go. I just love the aesthetic of these films, the framing, the opulence, the artifice, This film has a punk swagger and like a new wave glamour. It's just so, all of his films they are what they are. There is like choices made, design and aesthetics, and the makeup is amazing. And there's images in this. I've watched these movies so many times, but I move images from one movie to another. I forget where they even belong. But there's something in this movie that lives forever in my brain, and it's the shot down the alleyway or the walkway with the burning baby buggy.
Yes, the pram on fire.
Oh my gosh, there is something so satisfying about that image that we're able to linger on, and it's really magnificent. We also get, like you said, an awesome, interesting, fascinating narrative weaved through this film. Like Toya Wilcox with the yellowish hair, she introduces amyl nitrate. It's like this film has sort of John Waters vibes without feeling like it's being subversive and in your face, you know? Like John Waters, when he's showing a singing butthole in a movie, there's a reason. And Derek Jarman...
The point is to be filthy.
Right. And Derek Jarman doesn't do that. That's not the thing. But it has a grime to it because of, I don't know if it's the fact that this isn't like a mainstream sort of pop culture thing. It's not made for the now. It is of a time for sure, but he never made anything with the idea of like, this is current, this will be what's popular, this is in vogue. He was just filming with his friends, and this is what was there. So there is the anger of the state of Britain, and there is the punk and the new wave and this awesome group of people he's assembled to make a film. I absolutely love it, and I love the way that he starts to transition into using the Super 8 film more. So when the character, is it amyl nitrate that remembers being a ballerina?
Ballet?
Yes, and we transition from the music box to an actual ballerina, and I love that transition so much. I think it really imprinted upon me this like love for independent cinema. I mean, experimental cinema, even though this film is a narrative.
No, absolutely. I think something that really adds to this is that it's filmed on location in England.
Yes.
So when you're seeing this street that looks really run down and this burning pram, it's like, no, they found locations in England that were derelict. You know, the result of destruction that had happened in the Second World War during the Blitz, things that were happening with development, some places getting run down while other places, resources were put into building other sectors up, the decline of manufacturing and industrialization. It's like they found locations that give you that post-apocalyptic, desolate wasteland feeling. And then you also have our characters in this saying no future.
Yes.
And talking, there's the Borgia Gins character who's kind of like a stand-in for the media. Has this great quote: "This is the generation who grew up and forgot to live their lives."
Yeah, goosebumps.
Oh, yeah. I have like little shivers just saying it. There's so much like that. You have these cool scenes where it's just like this group of young punks causing mayhem, and then it's punctuated with amyl nitrate giving these history lessons, which are really indictments of the current system.
Right.
And this Borgia Gins character that's telling us how media manipulates you. So you have these really interesting, fascinating, poignant ideas. And also you have little Nell having sex in a bed with Toya watching.
Yeah.
And the guy's name is Happy Days.
Yeah.
Like it's all of those things.
Yes.
It's amazing.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, it's a film that, I mean, it pairs well with, I've tracked down a movie called Car Cemetery this last couple of years, and it's got those aesthetics. And I was watching it late at night because I didn't think Sarah would care. She was out of town. And I started texting her instantly because it felt like I had found someone that was so influenced by Jarman, or wasn't, and just working at the same time with the same tools, but in Spain. And it was just like, I was like, oh my gosh. This last year, I also watched my last Derek Jarman film. I put it off for years, and because I wanted to have at least something else. And I hope every year that somebody finds something that they're like, we've unearthed this. And I'm like, oh God, I get more. But yeah,
Fingers crossed.
I'm very happy with Jubilee and what it is. And if anyone's interested and hasn't seen Jubilee and this sounds enticing, watch it. Did you see it on the Criterion channel? Is that correct? I mean, this time?
Yeah, this time I watched it on the Criterion channel. It is also on HBO Max.
Oh, great. Perfect.
Because some of the Criterion stuff also ends up on HBO Max. I think a TCM connection or something.
No, it's also
Not
weird.
everything Criterion, but some things
Of course.
overlap. So if you have HBO Max, you have access to Jubilee.
There you go. That's fantastic. Like I said, Jubilee was not my first Jarman film, but the next film we're talking about, it was. And the next movie we're discussing is The Angelic Conversation from 1985. It's my introduction to Derek Jarman by way of Coil. It features one of my favorite songs from any of the soundtracks, titled Never. The synopsis is an experimental film written and directed by Derek Jarman centering around two gay lovers. That's as much as people can give it a synopsis. This is what
Try harder, folks.
Yeah, this is what I thought of as Derek Jarman, because I didn't see his narrative films for a while, and I just thought this is what the guy does. He does these types of films. So it's shot on 8mm in the earliest days of transferring film to 35mm. Dame Judi Dench reads Shakespeare sonnets. It's one of his most beautiful films, I think, and it has a little, very little, residual narrative, if any. It's his absolute favorite film of anything he's done. I think that's really interesting. It's full of soft images of homosexuality, which is a stark contrast at the time to which you would see homosexuality associated with violence, being attacked or fighting back. It's one of admiration and embrace. Shakespeare sonnets are a wonderful touch, but let's hear Derek talk on it.
You lead your life as if it was as normal as possible, and you see all this aggression being directed against you. So The Angelic Conversation is a film really for an audience who would perceive that. Yes, that's The Angelic Conversation. And I put the Shakespeare sonnets, of course. I brought the Shakespeare sonnets into it because they are the most perceptive poems and poetry about love is Shakespeare's poetry, which is directed to a young man. And so the greatest love poetry in the world is homosexual. And I think we should remember that.
I find this film hypnotic. I find it engrossing. The slow, gritty images that unravel, revealing bodies entwined, eyes watching from afar, stoicism of youth. I feel the camaraderie of the group of creative people he brought together to make this film, and the soundtrack. I mean, I listened to the soundtrack while I was prepping for this episode, just on repeat. So what are your feelings on The Angelic Conversation?
This film is so much a feeling experience. And I tend to watch a lot of films that are like thinking movies, cerebral, makes you think, ask questions. This is one of those films that I can put this on and really tap into feeling. And this, for me, is a movie about love.
Yes.
Romantic love. And you feel it, and it's so dreamy and beautiful. And Dame Judi Dench's voice, those sonnets, and Coil, and it's gorgeous. But I think also something that really struck me as I was doing the prep was thinking back to when this came out in 85. You know, at that time, a lot of the homophobic rhetoric around homosexuality was painting people as sexual deviants.
Yep. Yeah.
The talk about homosexuality was all about sex and this judgment of the sex being deviant, dirty, promiscuous, you know, all of these negative things for a segment of the population who had a certain set of ideas or values. And this film comes out in 85 and it's challenging that. It's not just about sex, although I'm here to say, and I'm sure Derek Jarman would too, sex doesn't make you deviant,
right?
Period.
Yeah.
But we want to put that on the table. Beyond that, it's about love. It's about connecting. People connect sexually, but they also connect emotionally. And this film, for me, it's like you feel that emotional connection. And I think too, this one, there's a lot of like symbolism you could explore if you wanted to. The carrying of torches, the carrying of barrels on the back, light reflecting off of mirrors like a beacon, kind of religious imagery of, you know, like shouldering a cross and caves. But you don't have to go there.
No.
Like I can watch this and I just feel this warm glow of a couple in love against all odds.
Yeah. when I think of Derek Jarman and people in the States, I think in Britain he's celebrated as he should be. In the States, not at all. I feel like people don't talk about him, they don't watch his movies, and
I think it's just you and me sometimes.
yes, that's how I feel. And it's funny because I've spent so much time just me and Derek, just reading his journals and hearing his voice in my head. So it's kind of surreal to get to have this conversation with another living person. So thank you again for being here. But I feel like the Angelic Conversation, the reason I say it's one of the movies that I think of as Derek Jarman, and then it makes me sad for Americans especially, is in this time and age, people give things so little time. It's like they turn something on, they go, oh, I don't like this, and they flip the channel. There's not these like early Jarmusch, not early Cronenberg, but there's definitely a pastiche of Cronenberg's work where they're asking you to take your time. They're asking you to sit down and spend some time with something, which you would do with any other art form. You would go to a museum and not just run by paintings and be like, not for me, not for me, not for me.
Yeah, you stop to look.
You stop and look and you listen, and the sound, the experimental use of sound and the unraveling of images, it's not at a breakneck pace. And so I feel like it's hard to ask people to like give yourself to something. But I encourage people to give themselves to the Angelic Conversation because it is such a rewarding watch to be basking in people's love for each other. And then the weight it's added to it, like you said, with the religious imagery and the things that like gay community in 1985 deserves just as much to be portrayed in these artistic, fantastical ways as anybody else for their belief system or whatnot. And I just think that Derek Jarman, in his own words, said he was just making movies. But we get to sit back and be like, oh my gosh, like you made this without any idea of what you were doing. He went there with his friends to locations. They gave each other the cameras. They all creatively made something, and then he wove it together to be something. And it's something that's made of a community of friends. And that's something I feel through most of his movies. It's like he brings back the same people and with these faces and voices. And when you watch all this stuff together, you really get to be along with the gang. And you never forget your first film from a director that you start to love. And so the Angelic Conversation, next to the next movie we're going to talk about, it's really, really a special one. Had you seen this back in the day?
No, I had not.
Oh, this was part of the rewatch or
this was
Criterion.
This was so part of the genesis of this episode.
Yes.
Why we're doing this. I mean, no, you and I have done this thing where like recommendations will come up on a podcast and Derek Jarman will get mentioned, and you and I kind of do that. Leonardo DiCaprio point at the TV like
yeah
Derek Jarman. So you and I had kind of done that back and forth in the time that we've been acquainted.
Mm-hmm.
But then Criterion Channel in February of this year, 2023, released a Derek Jarman retrospective, 12 films, all there, gorgeously rendered, great sound. Like these are good transfers.
Couldn't believe it.
And so I decided it was going to be the month of Derek Jarman. I was going to rewatch all the films I had seen before, and I was going to finally see the ones that I had not been able previously to track down. And Angelic Conversation, it just blew my mind.
Oh, so glad.
Madly in love with it instantly. And this has jumped up to be one of my most favorite of his work. It's gorgeous.
Yeah.
It's gorgeous on like every level, visually, in terms of the soundscape between the music and the narration. It's just amazing. It's just amazing.
I totally agree. It just feels like he came from painting and somehow brought that aesthetic to film. I don't even know how to accurately articulate what he's doing with the Super 8. He did 2 narrative features that are gorgeous, and then he starts working in a completely different way, and it just, for me, it felt like art, just as good as anything that would be in a museum. It still feels that way to me, but it's hard to separate me from something that I've loved for so long. But yeah, I have the soundtrack, I have the movie, I surprisingly enough don't have the script for this, but bits and pieces, bits and bobs, some would say, through some of his work. But yeah, I love it. The Angelic Conversation is really great. I don't know what else to say about it.
Get on it, folks. And let me just say, for anyone who's listening to this episode but has not seen the Angelic Conversation, if you're a little weary of something, non-narrative, this is not a long film.
No.
This commitment we're talking about to like sit
Yeah,
and
it's not
take
a
in the art and
4 hour.
enjoy it. Yes, they're not asking you to sit there for 4 hours with it.
Yeah.
Does not have a long runtime, but it's profound.
Mhm.
And it does tell a story.
Oh,
You
yeah.
can
Yeah.
trace a story.
Yeah. Oh, that's the last thing I wanted to say about Angelic Conversation is I would have people come over to watch movies every Friday, and I would pull movies from the shelves of our video store, and I would be like, this is what we're watching. And I would play usually 3 movies for a group of friends. This is in high school. I put on the Angelic Conversation for 7 kids in high school, which is a very Dirk thing to do. I get it. But
That's a bold.
yeah.
It's a bold move.
But one of those kids is who I referenced in the beginning of this episode, and I honestly don't think he'd ever seen a gay man portrayed on screen. And it's certainly
Yeah.
not in a way of love. And you could see like this was impactful. This was huge. And so I can only imagine as I fumble through the intro for this episode, the impact these images had on generations of people who saw themselves on the screen in a way that straight people or whatever have seen for decades. It's like
That take for granted.
for granted. Like, oh, we
Yeah.
can embrace on the street or whatever. It's just like there's so much value in everything that he made, and I can only like stand at the sidelines and be like, this must have been huge for so many
Yeah.
people.
Well, and that's something that's incredible when you think about Derek Jarman's life. He's born in 42. I think.
So, yeah.
Homosexuality isn't decriminalized in the UK until 67.
Right.
And, he's a young man by that point, and he comes out, lives openly.
Yeah.
And even though it's decriminalized,
Oh, yeah. That
doesn't mean that there's not, all of this
Yeah.
discrimination. And into the 80s, it's still, after years have gone by and change, but this was still like a radical thing to show a gay couple in love.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is more important now than ever
Oh, yeah.
with kind of the social political climate we're dealing with
Ugh.
here, Europe, and a lot of places. Every revolution has its counter revolution.
Mhm.
And these positive representations are just as important today. So many decades later,
Yes.
but this still matters.
Yeah. And it'll always exist. So that's, the power of the Angelic Conversation. Our next film is The Garden from 1990. The synopsis is a nearly wordless visual narrative, intercuts 2 main stories and a couple of minor ones. That's the best they could do. I feel like whoever is doing the synopsis for Derek Jarman movies barely tried.
They need to pass the torch to somebody else.
I mean, a wordless narrative intercut with 2 main stories and a couple of minor ones? All right. Well, so The Garden...
You could do better.
Yes! Give me that. Pass that torch over here. I will carry it in slow motion Super 8 footage. The Garden wasn't meant to be a movie. He was just filming his garden, and then he was urged to make a feature. So a lot like Angelic Conversation. He brought his friends down. They added the sort of Christ crucifixion story and won an award from the Catholic Church that year for Best Religious Film. I love that. Tilda returns, of course. All of his stuff was my introduction to Tilda. It's my introduction to Dame Judi Dench. Like, these wonderful powerhouse performers we now know were running around with this madcap group of awesome artists creating
Sean
these
Bean.
things. Yeah, young Sean Bean.
Not in this film, I
No.
don't think, but in others, yeah.
Yeah. And in fact, I think it's the first movie he dies in because he dies in so many things. I think this is the
Caravaggio.
not in this movie, but this is probably his film of a more collage style with a more fractured narrative that I know the best. I always think of Angelic Conversation because it was my first, but the aesthetic, the 90s, late 80s kind of bleeds in here.
Yeah.
I just couldn't get enough of this. The sort of anti-capitalism stuff. It was all my heartstrings being struck at once. The beach plays a significant backdrop in here. It features Prospect Cottage, which is the fisherman's house that he moved to in '86 on a stone shingle. It sat devoid of life, and he planted a garden to grow life where there was none, to create beauty in a void. Come on, people. Like,
It's near a power plant. You can see the power.
Yeah, the nuclear power plant. Every
Yeah.
aspect of this man's life was just art. Everything I read, like in one of the books, there's a picture of a bedroom that he had at one point, which was in sort of a derelict warehouse sort of area, and it's just a greenhouse in the middle of the room, and that was the bedroom. It's just like you see like a plate of apples, all the things that when you're a kid you're like, this is art, this is artists, this is how artists live. Like it's, I love it so much, and that's at the heart of the garden. What's your history with the garden?
So this was a recent first time watch.
Yes.
And this film, I think it's amazing. I also think for me, this was one of the most challenging
Interesting.
because it's dense with symbolism.
Yeah.
And I grew up Catholic. So like he's hitting me with Madonna and Child and the ladies in the headscarves. It's like, oh wait, are those supposed to be apostles? And I'm seeing clergy, like cardinals pulling something up a hill, and
Yeah.
Jesus is wandering, and there's a lot going
A
on here.
lot.
Judas with the credit card. It's
Yeah.
but I also love that about it
Mm-hmm.
is that it's, you know, where angelic conversation is this very dreamy, warm kind of glow.
Mm-hmm.
I think the garden is just so dynamic,
Like a garden.
like a garden.
Multiple
And
colors and layers.
yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
It is exactly that. So this is one that rewatching it in preparation for our discussion today was like picking up on so much more than I did the first time.
Oh yeah.
And I love that. I love films that reward you
Mm-hmm.
for coming back and revisiting them.
Yes.
And I anticipate that when I watch this again
Mhm.
in the future, because I most certainly will, there's even more
Yeah.
that will jump out to me, that will hit different for me. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah. The weird thing about having this podcast and getting to have lovely conversations like we've got to have on the reflecting skin and things that really like mean a lot to me is I see things in myself and I'm like, oh, this is part of why I am who I am, is the garden. I remember watching it for the first time and seeing the women in the headscarves playing the water in the wine glasses. They're sitting it, for anyone that hasn't seen it, oh my God. They're sitting at a long table. It's got this video backdrop and they're doing the thing where you have the wet rim of a glass and you run your finger over it and it sings. And I had never seen that. It felt like he's referencing something biblical, and yet it's not in your face because I was very against all of that. And I was grinning ear to ear because I'd never seen this image. And that's something that I have carried with me to this day. I will sit through anything to see something I've never seen before. I just love it so much. And that's in this film, The Garden. Also, the credit card commercial with Judas that you talked about, I love it so much. There is somebody hanging in the background while this sort of credit card commercial is happening, and there's a part where the person hanging, which has a black tongue hanging out of their mouth, looks at the camera and lifts up the credit card and is nodding to the camera. It's just so funny to me. It's just really, it's like, and this is my brain skittering to catch up with the love and admiration I have for this is like the conversations that I got to have with Lynch with people, because Derek Jarman didn't get theatrical releases here, and by the time I came around
Right.
to him, you know, nobody knew who he was, but David Lynch movies were, and so we could talk about the symbolism in David Lynch movies. I could never get to have that conversation with Derek Jarman, but there's so much, and like I would have
There's
loved that,
so
you know?
much.
There's-
It's a lot.
Yeah.
And it's so cool when you're like
Mhm.
watching it. I mean, I would say to anyone who hasn't seen The Garden, watch it the first time. Don't worry about that.
Yeah.
Just experience it the first time. Let it wash over you.
Mhm.
You can go back and rewatch it, and then you can pull all those little symbolic
Yeah.
threads.
Yeah.
You know?
It's really fun, and the difference between the movies we've talked about is so vast and yet feel from the same person, which I don't think you can
Yes.
say about a lot of people when they're doing something that could be seen as experimental as angelic conversation. But if you've seen, you know, Sebastian or Caravaggio or Edward II, it's like, what? But you get it because it has his artistic eye. I mean, even when you watch Ken Russell's The Devils, it's like, well,
Yeah.
there was a master at play here too, and his name was Derek Jarman. But I love The Garden. I love the artifice of it. I love how it feels when he gets cheeky with the credit card commercial. Like I said, the old
Or the
lady.
Think Pink
Oh, Think Pink.
musical number.
Oh. We used to say that to each other in high school because I also showed, of course, The Garden. Because once I gave people a taste of angelic conversation, I was like, well, we're going to stay on this as I have a captive audience. But yeah, Think Pink was a hit. My friend Geneva would say it all the time. Any other thoughts on The Garden before we move on?
I think it's one that I will revisit many, many times.
Yeah.
For sure.
It's dumb for me to say that because I will watch
'Cause
all
you
of his
have.
movies over and over and over.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm so happy to hear you say that because that's how I feel about The Garden. And I think I could convince more people to watch The Garden than Angelic Conversation, although I think it's important to watch all of them.
I agree. Also, let's say, hey, this could technically be a Christmas movie. There are singing Santas.
Yes, that's true. Oh my gosh, maybe that'll be the Christmas movie this year for the podcast. That's a great
So
idea.
everybody,
Yeah,
The Garden is a Christmas film.
there it is. Put it on the list. Okay. We follow The Garden with Wittgenstein, or Wittgenstein, from 1993, Derek Jarman's portrait of philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein, focusing on his theories and repressed homosexuality, something he was never explicit about, but Jarman is like, no, I figured this out. Derek took the script by Terry Eagleton and heavily rewrote it, almost into vignettes of Wittgenstein's thoughts, and it goes from being a child to one of the most revered philosophers, even though he hates philosophy. It's really clever, it's very funny, easily the film where you get his wonderfully warm sense of humor, and it's shot and performed on a stage, which I love so much. What's your history with Wittgenstein?
This was also a recent first-time watch.
Yes!
And this movie is so playful. The visuals are so striking, but it's also in a lot of ways very simple
Yeah.
visually. And that adds to what makes it so striking, the contrast and the colors, the narration. You know, you start out with a young Ludwig.
Ugh.
And then later on, we get narration of him as an adult. And then you get narration from some of the other figures in his life, like Maynard Keyes and Bertrand Russell. But it's so funny.
Yes.
It really is funny.
Yeah.
And to pair that sense of humor with a film about a philosopher, which does include little snippets and excerpts of the philosophy, these philosophical questions and ideas and this existential thought, to have a movie about that, talking about things about what is real and, the nature of language and the limitations of language and all this stuff. And then to have a Martian.
Yes.
This little green Martian having a conversation with the young Ludwig who's narrating as if he has hindsight on the whole of his life. It's a good time. It's a fun one.
Yeah, oh man. So when I saw Wittgenstein, I was blown away. I was also into theater at the time, so it felt like, all right, so it's custom made for me. The simplicity of the visual by staging it the way he stages it is so smart. The eye has nowhere to wander. We are locked into the performances of these people on the stage, and it's just so clever and fun. So I have a passage here, and I wanted to read it because it's got stage directions. So for people that have not seen it, here we go. This is Scene 8, The Rhino. Wittgenstein and Russell are sitting at a table in the middle of a heated conversation. Russell is frustrated. Russell: why won't you just admit there's no rhinoceros in this room? Wittgenstein: because, Professor Russell, the world is made up of facts, not things. Russell: look for yourself. Russell looks under the table, and we see there is nothing there. I tell you for a fact, there is no rhinoceros in this room. Wittgenstein: the issue is metaphysical, not empirical. Russell: I thought the next big step in philosophy would be yours. Now, I'm not so sure. Russell exits, with Wittgenstein following. We see young Wittgenstein crawling out from underneath the table wearing a yellow rhinoceros horn. Young Wittgenstein comes out from under the table, puts his fingers to his lips, and says, shh. It's these playful little vignettes that we get that are so cute and endearing, and yet he's also talking about philosophy and things. It's really, really clever. And then as Wittgenstein ages, you get other players from Derek Jarman's previous films. It's just, I love it. The scene of Wittgenstein in a cage, a bird cage, is so wonderful, just visually impactful, and then the words that are coming out. We get the scene this is a very pleasant pineapple, which is like my Derek Jarman test. If someone's ever like, I like Derek Jarman, and I'll be like, oh, is this a very pleasant pineapple? And if they don't know what I'm saying, I'm like, gotcha. You don't know Wittgenstein. Um, I just,
But let me share it with you.
yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
no gatekeeper. I'm like, let me tell you about something that you should check out because I clearly own the script. So that's
Yeah.
that's a layer. I don't really have much else to sell people on Wittgenstein other than that, like, this is the fun one. This one shows you,
Yeah.
like, look up images or interviews with Derek Jarman and you'll see this smile I'm talking about, which is just so warm and fun. And even as, AIDS wore him down before he passed away, in conversations that we can still find and watch, you will see him find reasons to smile and things to laugh about. And it's his sense of humor is really at play in Wittgenstein, and I just implore people to check it out. If you can't do anything else that we've talked about because that's not your thing, I think that there is stuff to enjoy here that is very Derek Jarman. So I implore you to watch Wittgenstein.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of my favorite lines from it is, and I think it's the young narrator that says it. It's, if people did not sometimes do silly things, nothing intelligent would ever get
Yeah.
done.
Oh my God. I mean,
And
yeah.
it sums up the film
Yeah.
that the film was made, because it does have some these kind of silly, humorous moments. And it's also talking about Wittgenstein and some of these questions he's asking, And I think it's a truism.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Just in life in general.
Yeah, the things I was into when I watched this movie, I mean, I could have picked anything to read out of this book because so many of the lines are like that. It's like, this is the type of stuff I would write down in my journals and like doodle around and stuff. It's like, it's got a lot of gems.
It does.
Sadly, we're going to move from the artistic, theatrical joy of Wittgenstein, and we're moving to Blue. Blue is Derek Jarman's final film. It consists of one blue screen through its entire runtime. It features music by, among others, Coyle, Brian Eno, and the voices of Derek Jarman, Tilda Swinton, Nigel Terry, and John Quentin. It's from 1983. It's Derek Jarman reflecting on losing his battle with AIDS. It was released 4 months before he passed due to complication of AIDS. The screen is blue because the creator of the film has experienced loss of sight due to the illness. This is the only film in which I have the soundtrack, the book, and the movie. It's sad, and yet much like the interviews he gave close to his passing, it's full of life, it's full of art, it's poetic, it's singular. And we're going to end this episode with Coyle's theme from Blue, because this is a celebration of Derek Jarman's life, even though the last film we're talking about is his last film. So what were your thoughts on Blue? Had you seen it before? Is this part of the Criterion thing?
It is on the Criterion thing.
Oh, wow, great.
Yeah, so definitely. I mean, even if you just like chip in and like share the subscription with somebody.
Yeah.
Like whatever you have to do. Yeah, this is on there. I was aware of this film and I had seen little clips and snippets other places.
Mm-hmm.
This was my first time recently sitting down and experiencing it from start to finish. And it was all of the things I had heard about it and the things that I knew about it. But again, similar to my experience with something like Angelic Conversation, like this film is an experience.
Mm-hmm.
And it was this sitting there. I had all the lights turned out, and it's just this really saturated blue on the screen, and it doesn't change. And we get the narration and the stories and the soundscape that's created. And it's so engaging and so moving. It like flies by.
Yeah.
It's a really profound experience watching this film.
Yeah, I agree.
It's a marvel. It's incredible.
Yeah, I found it and I watched it. I sat just like you. I sat in a dark room with just the blue screen. It's so fascinating how it plays, and for me it was very visual despite the blue screen when he talks about the experiences and you hear the sounds of him going to the doctor's office and the drip of the drugs, and it's just so, it feels real. It's almost like with just the blue screen there's no distraction visually, and so we go on this journey almost completely. I don't know how to word it exactly, but it's a very personal point of view. He is a filmmaker who works in a visual medium, and his eyesight is deteriorated. And that alone, I mean, come on. And then he's like, you have my journals. Now I'm going to walk you through this, like, personally. And you're going to experience what I'm experiencing. And Derek Jarman, the moment he was diagnosed with AIDS, he was public. And people weren't public in that way. And he saw this importance in representation. And that continued until he passed away. That's amazing to have lived this life and created these works of art, but also, like I said towards the beginning, gave us the sidecar to this experience. So even a kid growing up, as far as you could get from where he was, I could be there. You're in that room with him in that time. That's just an incredible gift. And it seems like, and I know it sounds like we're saying this is going to be super sad, he still finds light and levity. You still get moments of frustration and anger, of course, but it's done in a way that's not like manipulative in any way. He's not making you feel something. He's portraying what he's portraying because that's how he's always worked. And the fact that, like, I can listen to this, or I can watch it in a film, or I can read the book, which is also a work of art on its own, and it works all three ways. Come on. What? How? I just talked to a magician for this podcast, and Derek Jarman is easily doing a trick that I don't think any of us know how he's doing it. It just, I love it so much. So what was the last Derek Jarman that you watched for your Criterion rewatch?
Oh, what did I watch last? Anyone who follows me on Twitter knows that I like to do double features for myself. It's how I wade through the gazillion films to watch and rewatch, is I like to come up with like a little theme and I pair things. But when I was going on this journey of this Derek Jarman retrospective, I was trying to pair his films as well. And so I think I watched this one. It's like, I think I did Jubilee, I paired with The Last of England.
Oh, yeah.
That was one of the earlier ones. Caravaggio, I paired with Wittgenstein, because you have the biopics. And I think I might have paired this with Glitterbug.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Which is Derek Jarman.
Yeah. I'm coming to this from the perspective of someone that was very young during the AIDS crisis.
Oh, yeah, me too.
And I got my information at the time from just your mainstream news, and then it was kind of tangible as I hit puberty, and like safe sex by that point was like everywhere. And you had pop icons wearing condoms. We had moved into that stage. And it wasn't until I got into adulthood and having friends who had lived through it as older teenagers and young adults to really hear their stories and their experience. And I could see where a film like this, for someone who was in the clinics holding the hands of friends who were dying, this is probably, I could see where this could be a painful film for someone if they were really at ground zero. I think for me, as someone who was alive at that time but was very young, I really appreciate the openness and the vulnerability of this film.
Yeah.
There's a couple of lines where he talks about image, blue.
Yeah, colors.
This is the darkest made visible. Okay, no, here it is. Pray to be released from image. And it's like that double meaning of he was losing his sight due to these lesions in his retina. So being released from that need to see because you can't see. But also it's the self-image.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
The image that other people are going to see you sick, are going to see your health deteriorating. It was really cool watching this paired with Glitterbug, because Glitterbug kind of, it's like all this Super 8 footage from different parts of his life, And so it's like I watched Blue, because I watched them chronologically, like which one was released first. And so to watch Blue and hear him be so candid, honest about the experience of his illness and the illness and the death of the people around him, and then to see his life through Super 8 film and Glitterbug, like they're a really cool pairing to do together for the hopefulness of, even though he's making Blue at the end of his life, and there's so much pain and suffering, but there is also the hope of his legacy.
Yeah.
And it's very meaningful.
I agree. I mean, he had held the hands of so many in similar situations. So to be sharing his story from that point of view, I think it's so poignant. And I cry a lot with Derek Jarman, and I don't know where this comes from or why it's just been with me for so long, but I'm always brought back by the smile and the light in his eyes. There's something there with Derek Jarman that even in these moments, I think of it like he sees flashes from angelic conversation, you know? He lived such a life, and so it's not a dour situation. It's like this episode, it's a celebration of a life that was lived, you know?
Now you're gonna make me cry.
Well, I just think like there's something
But it's like
about
the happy tears of
yeah. Well, it's like we come in and we leave this life in the dark, and it's up to us to shine bright in between. And
yeah.
that's what he did.
Yeah, and so many of the films, ones we've talked about of these five, and some of the others, there's this reoccurring imagery of people holding up a mirror, and the light shines.
Yeah.
People holding torches, and it's these beacons,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And it's like he in life was one of those beacons.
Yeah, people were
and
drawn to him.
yeah, and his art,
Mm-hmm.
his visual art, the designs that he did for others, his films, his writing is a beacon.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, there's something really life affirming. There's something really hopeful in that.
Yeah, I agree. I need it. I love it. And I can't believe that we got to have this
too.
conversation. Anything else you want to say?
I'm just so honored that you invited me to have this conversation with you about Derek Jarman. I know how much he means to you, and
Yeah.
I feel honored to have gotten to talk about him with you.
I mean, clearly we've created a safe space together. We've talked about the reflecting skin. We've talked about Gypsy 83. I'm always beaming when we get to talk about things. So the second you were doing a Criterion rewatch of Derek Jarman movies, it was like seconds before I was like, is this an episode? Is this something we could do? And then it was tricky to pick, like you said, torches, pick 5 beacons from Derek Jarman to discuss in an episode. But I think this covers a wide swath of his work. There's a lot of shorts. There's a lot of features that we didn't discuss that people should go and find as well. But yeah, I think that's as good as it's going to get before I lose all the moisture out of my eyes.
I know.
Carmelita, I can't thank you enough for taking the time, for doing the dive on the Criterion, which you did of your own accord, but I am so thankful that you did. Where can people find you?
Folks can find me on Twitter, Letterboxd too, same handle for both, at Carmelita Says.
Yeah, with a C, Carmelita, right?
Yeah.
SAYS. I'm Dirk Marshall, VHUS_podcast on Instagram and Twitter. And I hope that you all watch any Derek Jarman, rewatch any Derek Jarman, read his memoirs. It's all super awesome and important. I hope we've convinced you this time. And until next time, this has been VH Us.